Hello everyone, how are you? Good morning. I want to tell you it's really a pleasure being here and chatting with you today about something I find really, really interesting, which is learning to love. Especially today, when we have this very fortunate connection with Nancy, with our dear Nancy. If you're anything like me, you probably struggle a little bit with forgiveness. And if you are a lot like me, you may look at the news and see amazing stories of forgiveness. Recently, a mother has forgiven the killer of her son during a trial. And this is not news. Well, it is news, but it happens. And I find myself asking, how do you get there? How do you get to the point where you can earnestly and honestly forgive the killer of your child? And I find myself struggling with that question because, quite honestly, I don't know if I would be able to. And then I wonder, did these people that are able to forgive to such a degree, did they just happen to, on the moment, forgive? Or is it something that they work on over time? Were they born this way? Because if they were, and it's something that you either have or you don't have, which is what most of us think, right? That you either are able to forgive or you're not, then we are in trouble. Because how do you get to that point? Does that mean there's some lucky people who have that inherently in themselves and some don't? So when are we going to get there? How do I get there? And so I myself, on my own little reflections and meditations, start thinking, how can I learn to forgive? How can I do that? And fortunately, we stepped across Spiritism, and Spiritism gives us some great advice on how to do it. So what I'm hoping to do today, if you indulge me, is to talk about one simple question of the Spirit's book, and one question alone, and focus on that as a great tool. And then hopefully make a point of how we have a great opportunity to learn and forgive in our everyday life, so that we may get to a point where we're able to do great acts of forgiveness in our lives. And hopefully as well, we'll chat a little bit about how forgiveness is really important to us in a variety of levels, on an emotional level, on an intellectual level, on a spiritual level, on a physical level. Does that sound like a plan? So far, so good. So I think what we're probably going to do is maybe do 50 minutes or so of a lot of blah, 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 blah. And then hopefully we'll have a chance to ask questions and interact a little bit more and exchange some ideas. Does that sound reasonable? All right, so let's just jump straight into it. Some people learn differently, so sometimes I'm a visual learner. So I wanted to try to make things a little bit easier by doing a little visual representation of our journey of healing, the way I look at it. So imagine us as a spirit, right? And we have our little world that we live in. And our focus is generally inside that world. And when we are focusing in our world, it becomes really hard for us to have compassion for anybody that's not us. So what we really want to do is change that, is still have ourselves as a spirit and still live in the world in our own life, everyday life of things and jobs and mortgage bills and utility bills and taking kids to school and back and whatever it is that we need to do. But what we hopefully what we will do in the process of learning to love is to expand our focus so that our focus is no longer just inside our little world, but it goes beyond our world and we're able to consider the world of others. Literally, it's thinking outside the box, right? So what we want to do is to spiritually think outside our box, our tiny little world, to encompass others and consider them. So that's what we're going to try to do, and to show that to forgive, we must necessarily do this. We must step out of ourselves and consider things outside, and hopefully it will make life a little bit easier. But how do we do that? Okay, so let's get a little bit more practical. So when we're talking about love and really focusing on love, our approach today is going to be, let's get some practical tools, some little tricks and methods for us to try to learn how to get to that process of forgiving. Let's talk about how we can practice that, right? So it's not enough just to have a tool, but it's important for us to also put that into use on everyday life. And also, let's stop to consider and hopefully understand that there's a physical component to forgiveness. There's some energy going on, not only with ourselves, but with everybody around us that's important for us to consider. It's just not a moral concept. It's just not something abstract that you do. But we know that, for instance, that forgiveness is actually very good for us physically. That those who are able to forgive, research shows, enjoy a healthier physical life because they don't harbor all the resentment, and all the resentment generally generates lots of different problems, physically speaking, from ulcers to heart attacks and to overall stress and anxiety in our lives. And so there is also a physical component to forgiveness. It's not just an abstract thing, like words that we speak, but it's something that actually has a physical impact in our bodies. And that's something that sometimes I feel we forget because we're just thinking about what's right or wrong or morality in general. So hopefully we'll talk a little bit about the physical concept itself. So far so good? And one last thing we want to do is we also want to chat a little bit and hopefully impart the idea that love, forgiveness, and gratitude as well are possible. They can be learned. We can practice them, and we can grow in our practice of forgiveness and gratitude. We can exercise this emotional, spiritual muscle if we only put our time to it. And it makes sense, right? Because God is fair, and why would some people have it and not others? When we see great acts of forgiveness out there, there are subtle reminders that we too can get to that level. But it doesn't mean it's going to be relatively quick or easy, but we can do it. So we can learn to love others. So that's what we want to do today, right? These 4 little things, and kind of get going on that. And hopefully what we're also going to do is we're going to use some examples from the life of Jesus, the Christ, because we think he was a fantastic model of how to live and how to behave, being a very evolved soul. And so we're going to take some parts out of it and see how he gives us this example of these practical things that hopefully we can do. And in a parallel as well, we're going to hope to make some parallels to our day-to-day lives and see if there are some situations where we can role play a little bit and see how we would go about doing this. So far, so good? All right. Okay, so let's jump into 3 steps. So where do we see those 3 steps? When I was struggling about it, I came across a very fantastic passage, and there's in the Gospels explained by Spiritism. There's a whole forgiveness piece in it, which is beautiful. It's chapter 10, Blessed are the merciful. There's forgiveness in there. But what really struck me as amazing was a question from the Spirits book, in which Allan Kardec and his fellow researchers asked the good spirits to tell us what is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it. And the reason why we ask about charity is because charity is love in action. It's the application of love in our day-to-day lives. So basically what they're asking is, how do we apply love in our lives? But not as we would do it ourselves, but how does Jesus, the great soul that came to teach us about love, understand it, that it should be applied? So basically we're asking, what is the method or the tool or the teachings that Jesus would tell us to use in our day-to-day lives so that we can be more tolerant and more giving and, in fact, more loving? And it's such a short answer, but I was really taken by it. And you know what the good spirits tell us? They tell us benevolence toward everyone. They tell us indulgence towards the imperfections of others. And they finish it off by forgiveness for offenses. Very abstract, right, in a way for me. And then I start thinking about it. So the key things here are benevolence toward everyone. So there's benevolence first. Then there's indulgence. Then there's forgiveness. And I start thinking, well, why did they start with indulgence or forgiveness instead of benevolence? Then it dawned on me a little bit that there is an order to things. That before, really, you can be indulgent, you have to be benevolent. And before you forgive, you have to do both of them. So the way I see it, The good spirits were giving us a very specific 3-step method for us to get to that point of forgiving and being truly able to let go and love, which was, one was benevolence, the second one was indulgence, and the third one was forgiveness. And it's kind of hard for us not to go through that road of benevolence and indulgence and forgiveness until we get to the top. And in a funny moment, I thought it was funny because it was B-I-F, so it's almost like beef, but not really. So whenever you have a beef with somebody, you can remember the BIF, the beef model, which was proposed by our higher spirits to untangle that problem. But how do we go about unbeefing ourselves, right? That's the big question. So let's break it down into benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness and see if something comes out of it. It jumps at us in a way that it makes a little bit more sense and makes it practical, right? All right, so let's start with benevolence, the first step. So benevolence. The origin of the word benevolence comes from like the 1400s, from Middle English, and it's broken down into bene, which is good, and vol, which is to wish, and ens is the practice of doing that. So it really is, at the end of the day, it's to wish well. So the first step is to wish well, is to want to have your problem fixed, or to want to forgive, to want to let it go. You have to first want, right? And we have some great quotes there. If we look at, for instance, at the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells us, if you love only those who love you, what reward will you have, right? And he goes on, since even sinners, right, even those who are struggling, do that. Love those who love them. And if you do good only to those who do good to you, what merit is there in that? In truth, I tell you, right, you must love your enemies and do good to all of those, right, and lend money to people without expecting anything back as a reward. Because then you will be the children of the Most High, who is good to ingrates, the ungrateful, and even to the wicked. Thus, be full of mercy, just as your celestial Father is. And it's a tough pill to swallow, right? So basically what Jesus, as a great psychologist and teacher, is telling us here is, you can't just be nice to those people who are nice to you. Because what's the merit in that? That's your obligation, right? They're being nice to you. You must at least be nice to them back. The challenge is, how are you being nice to those who are not so nice to you? And he goes further. He doesn't say, be nice. He says, you must love your enemies. Whew! That's hard, right? I don't think he was speaking figuratively here. I really think that once we look at this process over time, we are going to be eventually able to truly love our enemies. Not love them as our husbands or wives or partners, but to truly have a sense of familial love where you respect and tolerate and accept them for who they are. And so this method is really powerful in the sense that that's our goal, to be able to love even those who right now are not being so kind to us. That's a tall order. Really, really hard. Won't happen all of a sudden. But let's see where the good spirits take us. Okay, so how do we start doing that? Well, to wish well really is to start at least having the intention to heal and to not harbor any challenge or ill feelings with a person. Let's get some examples, for instance. Let's say that you are at a work and you are running for a promotion, right? And there's somebody else on your team as well who's running for a promotion, and they send out an email to their boss where they are not very kind to you, and let's say that they eventually get the promotion. Doesn't feel so great, right? Or let's say that maybe you're in a relationship and you feel betrayed. You're betrayed because your loved one cheats on you, and it never feels good. Some of us have gone through that, and we know it's really, really painful. So what is the first step then? The first step of dealing with all that is understanding that we want to forgive. We want to move forward. The first step is wanting to. But the beautiful thing about wanting to, in the beginning, this first step is we don't have to be 24 hours with that person, right? We don't start by forgiving by just living and following the people that we don't like around. We need a little bit of a distance, right? We need to process that and figure this piece out. So the first part of benevolence we can do away from the person that we are wishing to forgive. We don't have to even live in the same house or in the same city, the same planet. All we need to is to wish well, to have a positive thinking attitude towards them. And what better tool for us to learn to wish well and send good energy and be energized ourselves than through prayer? So positive thinking, I guess, culminates in prayer. There is no better positive thinking than prayer, because it's us asking the divine creator to help us achieve noble intent. So not only do we have our own energy going into this, but we're also asking for divine help to supplement our energy. So when we are wishing to get better or to forgive somebody, whether it's a relationship problem or a problem at work, we can always resort to this tool, this prayer, and say, dear God, or whatever it is that we want to call it, dear Creator, Mother, Father, it, nature, Tao, whatever it is, I would like to move past this and wish that person well. It's hard. Help me do it. And that was the first piece, mentally, as a tool that we can always resort to. Whenever we find ourselves in pain, we can go to that mental state of prayer and ask for help. And so what are we practicing then? How do we practice this? We are practicing the little box. We are practicing expanding our world. We are practicing the act of stop focusing on our pain and our needs and our wants and say, I am not outside of my box yet, but I am trying. I am exercising my spiritual muscles to try to think beyond my pain, to consider other people and say, I want to let go. So the tool is prayer, but what we are really practicing is to get out of ourselves and move forward. Because if you think about it, any time that we are hurt, that we're truly hurt, what we are really focused on is on ourselves. And the more inwards we look to our pain, the more our pain enslaves us. We become prisoners of a pain. And in fact, we become prisoners of that act that caused the pain, because we keep reliving that in our minds. It seems like it gets us, and we can't just move out. We keep thinking over and over, so we keep hitting ourselves over the head with the same pain, and we keep sending our body the same feelings of anxiety and frustration that harm us. So the first step is to stop looking into just our pain and saying, let's try not to hit ourselves over the head and relive it. Let's try to move forward. I want to move forward. And so, in a physical level, what we're really trying to do is break down all these negative thought processes and influences and energies that we have built during this process. This sense process. If we were to imagine, like our thoughts being energy and our bodies being all affected by energy, we would almost feel like we are just in a whirlpool of craziness when we are really in anxiety and in pain. Our body is just warped and wrapped up like a mummy in those negative thoughts that keep hitting and squeezing us. And so when we are trying to reach out and send good thoughts, what we're trying to do is start to break down this cocoon of self-inflicted pain that we are in. There's even a Chinese saying that says that when you are like being angry at someone, it's like drinking poison and wanting somebody else to die. Right? And so we wanted to get the poison out of ourselves, and through prayer and through positive thinking, what's going to happen is we are going to start changing our mental house, our mental emissions, and we're going to start breaking down that energy. It's not going to happen overnight, but the good news is that we need to practice it. We need to kind of go over and over again, and we can always resort to prayer to help to do that. And we don't have to do that right near the person. We don't have in this beginning stage to be with them to do it. In fact, it might even help us to distance ourselves a little bit so that we're not constantly yo-yoing back and forth between our feelings, right? Because sometimes we go through that phase where we have this anger, whatever it is, and we kind of get a little bit better, and it comes back. It goes and it comes back. So if you are close to a trigger of remembering that, then you're going to be having a hard time. So sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a break, away from that situation that causes you pain until you can step back into the fold to deal with it more accurately, right? If you are in the middle of a shootout, you want to get out of there, right? So what we are doing then when we are close to those people in that situation is we are letting ourselves be in the middle of a shootout. Let's get ourselves out. When we're all bulletproof, we can come back in if we have to. So far, so good? So step number one of our trek, of our passage then, is that of benevolence. We need to wish well. Then when we feel like, okay, I really feel like I am ready for step number two, and I would like to kind of move past this, then that's when indulgence comes in. And indulgence, it's a really interesting piece, because it's kind of hard to see that, but what we really want to do at the origin of the world is freeing the term from punishment. So what we want to do is to have tolerance and kindness. But what is tolerance and kindness? Tolerance and kindness really is being able to accept people the way they are. That's step number two, right? And that's really hard, because now we're moving away from ourselves and we're acknowledging the other person and saying, I might not like what you're doing. I wish you might be different, but that's how you are, and I must accept that. And there's a passage here that kind of gives us an example, and that's out of the Gospel of John, where we see here, where Jesus, the famous passage with the stoning of the woman that has sinned. He said, "Let the first among you cast the first stone if you have not sinned," which is really a beautiful. You might remember that passage, because it's really not condoning or condemning the behavior. It's just saying, if you have never done this before, then you can judge. But if you have, then you cannot judge, because you have no moral high ground here. So tolerance and kindness and indulgence really become a matter of us putting our thinking hats on and thinking to ourselves, have we done this or something similar in any way? That is, if we go back to our examples that we gave earlier about work and relationship, have I tried to get ahead by putting somebody else down? Or have I also cheated on somebody at one point in time? If I have, then I have no moral grounds to say I know better. So our tool here is really using ourselves as the moral yardstick, right? The Greek philosopher Anaximander once said, "Man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, of things that are not, that they are not." Right? And that's often what we do. We are the measuring stick for the world. If we don't want people to cheat, then we cannot cheat ourselves. If we don't want people to step on us, then we must necessarily never step on people. Because otherwise, it becomes a very selfish thing where we want people to do things that we ourselves are not doing. And so, when we think about that, and we do that inward trip and look back into our archives to see whether we've done something similar, then we start being a little bit more lenient and tolerant with those people, right? And so in that case, if it was a promotion that we're seeking and somebody sent an email out and said, have I sent that before? Yeah, maybe I have. So maybe I shouldn't talk too much about it. And so it's really an understanding that just like us, those around us and everybody else in the world is trying to be happy. And it's not necessarily that they're doing things to us because they're against us. It's because they're just trying to be happy themselves. Chances are they might not even be thinking about us, but what they do really ends up harming us. But because we think we're the center of the universe, of course that person did that on purpose, right? We were talking yesterday, a typical example, like, maybe you had roommates before and you woke up in the morning, you saw all these dirty dishes in the sink just piling up. And it's not the first time, it's not the second time or third or fifth time. And now you're just thinking, oh my God, I know that he or she did it on purpose. They did it on purpose. These guys are slobs. Why are they doing this? Right? We just create all the stories in our minds because we are thinking ourselves as the center. It bothers us. But maybe if we go talk to them and ask them, why did you leave the dishes? What if they told us, I am so sorry. My mom called, my dad was rushed to the hospital, and I had to get there quickly. Would that change the way you feel? Maybe, right? Because in that moment, you were taken outside of yourself and you realize, oops, maybe there's a world outside my need for having the sink clean, right? Maybe there were slobs, maybe, right? But it's important for us to consider that there's another possibility out there. So the self as a yardstick is a really important piece in our process to become a little bit more tolerant and kind towards people. It's important for us to note that we have to necessarily step out of ourselves. And if we think our little diagram again, where in benevolence we were testing our expansion, we were trying to get our circle or focus to go outside of our world and send good thoughts to other people. This is the test piece, where now we test to see if that mental expansion we did is going to hold, right? So before I was sending good thoughts and thinking well about the person, saying I want to overcome this. Now we are back into the fold of getting in touch with a person and seeing if our thought process is going to hold. If by rubbing with them, against them, we're going to go back to our old ways and say, no, I don't want to deal with this. So we practice our thoughts and our feelings a little bit in benevolence and wishing well, but it is in tolerance, living a little bit closer to that person every day, that we see whether we were doing good practice or not. So step number 2 necessarily is to test the first step, right? So far so good? Does it make sense? And so how about physically? Well, there's something great that's happening here, because if in step number 1 we were trying to really to get rid of that negative energy and thoughts that were with us, right? With step number 2 and being tolerant and understanding and accepting people for who they are, we're doing something important here. We're not letting any more energy pile on top of that. You're building your own little defense mechanism, your own shield, if you will, because now the things that the person is doing will no longer affect you like it did before. So if you have a glass of water of frustration, right? And through you, this is a live demonstration, people, don't do this at home. If you have a frustration and then by goodwill, you're able to kind of take someone down. Now with tolerance, every time that something happens, you're not going to put more water in. Right? So you're preventing the water. That's just a reason for me to drink water, by the way, because I was really thirsty. But you get the idea? So the first part, we were trying to get rid of those energies, and now we're preventing them from building again, because if we don't, if we're not tolerant, if we recuse ourselves from the situation, then go back and we feel hurt again, then we're going to have to step out again, and then we're going to come back again, and it's going to happen again, and we're going to have to send back again, and we're never going to move forward. So we are now learning to accept people and their acts just the way they are. Because we learn that's really not a reflection on us. That they are really, because now we expanded outside our little world, and we know that they're not necessarily doing that just on purpose. They're doing that because maybe they're misguided or misinformed or ignorant. They think that that's going to make them happy. And that's fundamentally different. We can even look at them as spiritual childs of sort. They keep doing the same thing because they think that's going to get them happiness, but he won't. But it's not a reflection on you. It's on them. And so you just accept them the way they are. Maybe you don't like it, but you let it go because there's nothing you can do about it, because you can't change other people. It is so hard already for us to change ourselves, right? We struggle with that, and that's pretty much the only thing we can control is ourselves. And sort of. So how do we control other people? How do we make them live their lives the way we want to? We can't. It's impossible. So we have to be okay with that. And that's mighty hard, because that forces us to come out of our own little world and be the center of the universe and acknowledge that there's other people out there. That's the expansion that we were talking about. And so step number 2 takes us into being again close in proximity from the person, and testing whether the training that we've done previously with our goodwill and our good thoughts is going to hold. If we have learned to step outside ourselves and wish them well, it still might bother us. We're still going to carry resentment. We're not free from pain right now, right? We're still feeling that act. We haven't let go. But at least we're trying. And now we've done another step, which is I've been able to step into this next phase, and now at least I can, again, share the same space with you. Before, I don't have necessarily to, but now I can share the same space. And that's a really important step because you're getting back into everyday living, right? And so to the examples that we had before about the job and about the relationship piece, maybe this is when we start talking back to people, right? We start going, if we are still a little peeved about our colleague who sent some horrible emails about us to get the promotion, maybe now instead of avoiding them, we're at least in the same room with them at the water cooler, getting some water, saying hello, how are you doing, and moving on. We don't have to go hug yet. We don't have to kiss and say, I missed you, I love you, because it would be insincere, right? It would not be true. But we can at least see them and not feel like we need to take a different route because we're bothered, right? And many of us do that, let's be honest. And that's the energetic piece that we even I can feel from the back of my neck, he's there, she's there, right? We're starting to let that go. So that's step number 2. And if we've done the goodwill, we haven't stopped practicing goodwill, by the way. We still can go home and use that tool and that prayer that we have, whatever it is, anytime. Lock yourself in the bathroom in the middle of the workday. Meditation, 2 minutes. Nobody's going to know you're praying or meditating if you're embarrassed about it. It's a sacred place, the bathroom. And so nobody will bother ask you what you're doing there. It's true. It is true. Like if you're really, something at work gets you, you just go to the bathroom, sit down, lock yourself in the stall, breathe, let go, try to let go. Take as long as you want to, Only thing is might happen is people might knock you and say, are you okay? Well, technically you're not, but you're going to say, yes, I'm okay, I'll be out in a minute. But it gives a whole new idea and a whole new meaning to the term hygiene, right? Mental hygiene is also very important for us to clear ourselves from the whole process. So if in step number 1, we were sending good thoughts and really trying to be open to the process, in step number 2, we're stepping back into the fold and seeing if what we've done is really taking place. In terms of energy, step number 1, we were trying to get some of that bad energy away from ourselves, so how we are feeling. Step number 2, we're not letting it pile up anymore. We're learning how to drain it so that it doesn't pile up anymore. So the snow doesn't keep piling up on our roof, so eventually the roof doesn't collapse, right? And then if we do all of that, and we feel we're ready for step number 3, which is the big one, then that's a momentous occasion. All right, step number 3, the big one, forgiveness. So the word forgiveness, it's from Old English to give away. This is a beautiful, beautiful word because if you really think about the meaning of the word is to completely give it away. To forgive is not just to forget, it is to give away. But give away what? What? Right? To give away all that resentment, to let all that go. You don't want to carry that burden anymore. You want to get that backpack, that emotional backpack that you've been carrying around, full of stuff, full of rocks, and you want to say, you know what? I will no longer carry this backpack. I am letting it go. I'm giving it away. Why? Because I don't want to be bothered by this anymore. And ultimately, the act that hurt me is not really a reflection of me. If somebody cheats on you, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything that warrants somebody else breaking your trust. Even if you break their trust, it doesn't warrant them breaking your trust. So to give away is to really forget your ego and the self and to let it go. That resentment just makes you a prisoner of that moment, right? You're really stuck in a moment that you can't get out of when you are resenting something that happened. So you're giving it away. And that's really hard. But by then, though, the great piece is you've already practiced sending good thoughts and thinking positive about it. You have already started to cohabitate or be in the same space with that person and have some conversations. And with time, you're going to be able to say, you know what? I don't want this anymore. I'm going to let it go. And that's when forgiveness comes in, which is a beautiful piece. And what is the tool here that we're using? If before for good thinking we did prayer to help us elevate our thoughts and think positive, and if for benevolence we were really trying to be together in the same space and be tolerant and kind. Here, we're just forgetting our ego that got hurt by something because we don't want it anymore. The poison that we drank, we're flushing out of our system. Because it's quite possible that the person that hurt us is not feeling as bad as we are sometimes. And they might not even be aware. And we're still carrying that with us. And if you're really, really hurt, why do you want to let the person who hurt you have control over your life? Why would you want something that happened that's painful, that you don't like, dictate the way you act or you think? Because honestly, that's what's happening, right? That hurt that you have, if you keep going at it and you keep carrying that backpack around, it's literally dictating how you think, how you feel. And you have the right to be happy. You have the right to let go. And this applies not only to forgiveness of others, but it also applies to forgiveness of ourselves. It's important for us, too, to let our shame or embarrassment, whatever it is, go. Because oftentimes we are really downtrodden because we did something horrible and we can't move out. And we have that analysis paralysis, right? Where we just keep reliving the same moment. But when it comes to forgiveness, we need to let it go. And so what are we practicing here, right? The practice here is to grow past ourselves. This is when we're finally thinking outside of the box, the diagram, when we're really thinking, you know what? There's more than me. That person was trying to be happy. They did something. I'm going to let it go because I don't want to be tied down to that anymore. I've got somewhere to be in my life. I need to keep moving because as long as I'm focusing on that piece, I will not be able to move forward. If you are still stuck in a relationship that didn't work, that you're trying to get over it, you won't be able to start a new relationship and have a really meaningful one because you're still attached. You're still chained to that bad relationship. If you were in an abusive relationship, you need to get out of there. You need to move on, right? If you had a horrible work relationship that was a little hostile, let go of it. Move on. Get yourself back on track. Otherwise, everything will be dictated by that unfavorable situation. And what is the physical piece that's happening here? Well, if it's step number 1 in benevolence, we were trying to break some of that energy that we had that was kind of getting us all anxious and curved and agitated. And if in indulgence, we were practicing not getting any more negative energy in, with forgiveness, we're really draining whatever is left out there. This is the moment when we feel that release. All of a sudden, we just feel lighter. We just, whatever it is, one day we wake up and we realize it's not there anymore, and it just goes. And then the world is all of a sudden a different place. And there's a great sentence by Dr. Dyer, who is a spiritualist, and he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. The box is still the same. Your reality is still the same. You're just looking at it differently. And so if before you were really frustrated with somebody and their presence reminds you of that act of suffering and everything, you let go. You took your backpack off. Next day you go in, it's still the same person. Maybe it's still the same office, but it's different. It's not the same anymore. You changed your whole world, which is still the same, by changing your perception. If you change your mind, you change your life. And this is what it's all about. It's about changing perspectives here. So that energy that was left with you, that was still hanging around, lingering, with time, it will go away, and you're able to let it go, to flush it out. And so that's a really great piece. And if you're really observant, you might look at this little slide and say, Dan, where's the example of the life of Jesus? I'm like, well, I didn't put any example there for a very single reason. Jesus never forgave anybody because he never got hurt by anybody. He never really took offense for the things we've done. He was such an evolved spirit that he understood where we were. He was tolerant from the beginning, so his cup of water never filled up. Right? Even when he's at the cross, we have the Father, forgive them for they know not what they're doing piece. He is not telling God, Father, help me forgive them. He's saying, Father, please don't hold anything against them because they're ignorant. They do not yet know. He's got no ill will or resentment. He's asking for us in his moment of suffering. Because his reality is this big, but his focus is way beyond that. So much so that he's worried about our well-being and our state of mind more than his physical pain and suffering. And that's the perfect example of how eventually we're going to get to. So he came down to help us out. Because of that, he had this bigger cosmic view where he knew how things worked, and he wasn't worried about protecting himself because he's been through all that already. He's graduated. So he never took offense. You can't offend somebody that doesn't take offense. You can try, but they won't take it. And there's a great Buddhist little story which I love. The Buddha was once sitting and meditating, and this general came. And he was really angry at the Buddha because he's been preaching around and talking about peace and love, and all the soldiers from this general were starting to defect. They didn't want to go to the army anymore. So the general came and just let him have it. Gave him words, what are you doing? And cussed him off and went at it for 5 minutes. How dare you do this? Don't you know what you're doing? You're my soldiers. And then at the end of his whole rampant tirade, the Buddha turns to him and says, General, when you give somebody a gift and they refuse it, where is the gift? And the story goes that the general then marched out in shame. So what he was really saying is, the general came in with a gift of anger and just wanted to give to Siddhartha. And Siddhartha didn't take the gift. So who was still holding the gift of anger? It was his. And so he left in shame because it was his anger. So Siddhartha, the Buddha, did not let somebody else's anger change his days, right? So that's the kind of the Christ-like mindset that we want to be into one day, where what other people do don't affect us. We're not there yet. We can practice. And sometimes it will get to us. But if it gets to us, then at least we have a way of draining that anger out of ourselves. Right? And the first type necessarily is to wish well and to want to do it. The second part is to be tolerant and kind so that we're not building more on top of it. And the third part is to take the back off and drain the rest of it and let it go. And if the first step we can do while we're still at a distance, the second step tells us necessarily that we need to practice being together again. And the third step of actual forgiveness is when we are going to be able to really let go. And then something magical might happen after that. Love might come, even in that situation. Because now we have overcome a really difficult situation, and we have a really powerful story and history with that person. And if you look back into maybe your own personal history, you might find that you might have some really meaningful relationships with people that you've disagreed before in the past. And that some kind of hard relationship moment in time has actually brought you together closer than you imagined before. I've got a couple of friends that I had some great arguments with, and we didn't like each other, and today we're really good friends because we're able to accept each other and to truly get out of ourselves to think about somebody else in a way that is not selfish. And so when we talk about love, again, we are reminded of the example of Jesus. And again, he says, we have a great passage from chapter 11 of the Gospel as explained by Spiritism, which I like to affectionately call Gabe's. My friend Gabe's, the Gospel as explained by Spiritism, tells me that a protecting spirit in Krakow, Poland says, you'll be correct, however, in stating that people are meant to be happy in this world if they would seek happiness not in material pleasures, but in the good. The history of Christianity tells us of martyrs who went joyfully to their death, and we even have the Christ who went to his death as well. In order to be Christians in your society today, neither death by martyrdom nor the sacrifice of your life is needed, but only and merely the sacrifice of your selfishness, your pride and vanity. You shall triumph in duty, if charity inspires you, and if your faith upholds you. That is to say, we don't have to die anymore physically to show how devoted we are to a divine life. We just have to let our ego die, right? Because our ego is the one that takes offense. When somebody hurts us, they're not hurting us, the self, our spiritual peace. They're hurting us, hurting our ego. And we're still attached to, oh, somebody embarrassed me, oh, they hurt my honor, or what are my friends going to think when they find out that I was cheated on? Well, if they're your friends, they're not going to feel like you did anything wrong to get cheated on. How could you possibly do something that warrants somebody else betraying your trust? Right? And that goes for us too, as a moral yardstick, right? A moral yardstick. If somebody hurts us, we cannot do back to them because we know how bad it feels. It takes a whole new level. So when he says that happiness was not of this world, when the Christ said it, it's true. It is not yet of this world, right? Happiness doesn't come from material things. Happiness comes from the spiritual things and being in joy and love of people. But happiness is in this world. This world is not just pain. We can't say, oh, you can't be happy in this world because happiness is not... No. You have a duty to be happy in this world. You have to change the way you look at things so that your world changes. There's lots of things to be happy about. There's lots of people that care for you. Even on the other side, we know, with the good spirits, and now we know that there's life after life, there are people cheering for us on the other side who love us. There may be your parents from a previous life, maybe friends from a previous life, maybe parents and friends from this life. They're all out there cheering and loving for you. So there's plenty of reason to be happy, because it's also a subtle reminder that the love that we make in this life, that the bonds of goodness and love that we have with each other, with new friends we make, they are going to live on after our physical body passes. So today we have a subtle reminder that the love and the relationship we had with our great friend Nancy will live on forever. And she will be on the other side cheering for us, and we will be here fondly remembering her and knowing that we will meet again, and maybe quite frequently. Maybe while we are asleep, we are already meeting and talking. And we shared a common bond that we all wanted to get better, and we were working on ourselves through Spiritism. It goes on, it's beautiful. So love is not of this world yet, but it is of the other spiritual realm. But it can be found here because we are bringing it back, right? When we are traveling somewhere, what do we pack in our backpack? Whatever it is that we're going to need on the other side, right? If I'm going to a ski trip, I'm going to pack my ski jacket, my boots. If I'm going to the beach, I'm taking my swim trunks, right? I'm taking my, hopefully your suntan lotion and all that good stuff. Well, when we start thinking with the spirit, as opposed with the physical body, what we are doing is preparing ourselves for this great journey, and we are focusing then on things we're going to put on our little baggage, our little backpack to take to the other side. And what kind of things are those? They're not going to be your position, the jobs, or how many girlfriends or boyfriends we had. It's going to be the meaningful relationships that we developed, the great things that we learned, and how we improved ourselves morally and are happier because of that. That's what we take to the other side, which does not rust, or it's not eaten by moth. That's our treasure. And so that's what important piece for us to do. And what happens then is we stop looking back when we begin to love, and we look forward. When we forgive, until the point where we are ready to forgive, or we're forgiving, we're still stuck in the past. We're still driving a car, looking in the rearview mirror. Not very safe, right? Hopefully we all know this. Do we all know this? Don't drive or looking through the rearview mirror all the time. Okay. Check every once in a while, but keep looking forward to the window. So when love finds us, and the greater spiritual awareness finds us, our mind shifts. We do that mental shift that we're talking about, and we change our mind and change our lives, because we're now stopped looking at what hurt us and stuck in the past, and we start looking forward to all the great things that we can accomplish for ourselves or can accomplish with other people. We stop living in the past. We begin to live in the moment with an eye towards the future. It's a really beautiful transformation. It's a lot more pleasant too. Because if you're driving a car looking back, all you're thinking about is the person behind me going to come close enough, right? And you eventually crash your car here. So it's really, really hard. Something else that we always have to tell us then, that this little formula, the BIF formula, right? B-I-F, the benevolence, indulgence, and the forgiveness, it's something that can't be practiced. In fact, it has to be practiced. If those people that we see today, they're capable of great acts of forgiveness, can do it, it is because they worked on it, right? Either in this life or in a previous life. But they've been working on the fact of changing the way they think, disconnecting themselves from the fact that, it wasn't necessarily all the time personal, and that everybody is in their path to evolution, and that it is better for us to let the backpack with our heavy feelings go so that we can move forward faster. Otherwise, we move very slowly with all that weight in the back of us. And that's the beautiful thing about it. That love becomes love with an exclamation mark, because it becomes empowering. And there's a great saying in the Tao that when somebody loves you, it gives you strength. But when you love somebody, it gives you courage, right? So when you receive love, it's great, it feels lovely, nice. But when you love, when you're able to do that yourself, you're empowered to do great many beautiful things. And you see people who have achieved great levels of love in this life, the Mother Teresas, the Gandhis, right? People who free a nation, like Gandhi did, without acts of violence. That's incredible. Just because of a single man was able to galvanize people and look forward. And of course, we see the Christ who split history in two, before and after him, with so much love. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And one of the tools that really helps us do that is Spiritism, because it allows us, as a body of knowledge that's always progressing and changing, right? It's allowing us to get this great information from our spiritual friends who are wiser than us, but who are still the intelligence of those just like us that lived through this before, and tell us, hey, I've gone through this. Here's some tools that you can have. Use this method. Think about being proactively good with your thoughts, being benevolent. Think about building your own tolerance and kindness towards others, and understanding that they are too a spirit in evolution just like you. And it's probably going to be really funny, right? 4 or 5 reincarnations from now, when we look back and we say, remember that time, 3 incarnations ago, when for 6 months I was really peeved about that? That was so funny. Probably when we're teenagers and we think something happened is the worst thing in the world, oh my God. So-and-so, I went to somebody's house and I dropped a glass of milkshake in their carpet. I was so embarrassed, and you agonize for 3 weeks because you dropped something on somebody's carpet because you're really worried about people are going to think about you. And so when we take the biggest view, the biggest perspective, the spiritual view, and we see ourselves as a spirit that keeps on going and see everybody else too, right, expanding a little box, then we realize that every once in a while we're going to bump. But we're not going to bump because we went on purpose bumping. It was because we're just trying to be happy, and sometimes we don't know better, and we rub against each other. Some rust falls off, and we move on, and we're all going to get to the end goal together. And that's really a fantastic piece. It's expanding our minds to the fact that we are immortal spirits. We are not bodies that have a soul. We are souls who happen to be in a body. But sometimes we think with our physical bodies, with our presence, our lives here, when I have time, I will worry about the spiritual stuff. Right now, I need to pay the bills. True, important, pay the bills, right? But there's always time for you to meditate and reflect, right? Do you take showers? Meditate in the shower. I just heard it from Vivaldi the other day. If you get to the age of 70 and you take showers, frequently, which we all hope we do, let's not find out. By the time that you're 70, you have spent 2 years of your life in the shower. So you could have been meditating for 2 years when you get to 70, right? You can be a Zen master by the time you're 70, and oftentimes you are, because you have taken the time. Do you brush your teeth? Meditate while you brush your teeth. You have 5 minutes to reflect on important moral values and how you think you should act. Do it. Go to sleep, turn the TV off before you give yourself 3 minutes. Do what the great spirit of St. Augustine tells us in the Spirit's book. Reflect about your day. What worked? What didn't? Think about it. Next day, do it differently or do more of. That's all important because we need to value the fact that we are spirits first and physical bodies later. The physical body is just the clothes of the spirit. Some people just happen to have more fashionable clothes than others. But at the end of the day, what really is going to matter is our spirit. And the question is, what is it that we're doing so we're not packing our luggage with all this resentment that's unsolved? Because we now know, too, through the connection with the spirits, the life goes on. So if we are having a tough relationship and we are not able to deal with this now, we are going to carry that with us to the other side, and we may have to come back and deal with this in another life. Maybe that explains perhaps some difficult family relationships that we have. Maybe it explains some challenges we have with friends that are in our lives in ways that we can't really avoid them. Maybe these are unresolved issues that come from before, right? Because if every effect has a cause, like if everything is has a cause, and the cause of these problems that you have are not found in this life, then they necessarily must come from a previous one. It doesn't really matter where you come from. What matters is you need to deal with it, because you probably don't want them to be there on your next one. So the method of loving, of building your resilience, your spiritual resilience, and the act of good thinking, it's a great one because eventually it leads you, when you see the bigger picture, into this thing called gratitude. And you begin to realize, if you truly think about this, that God is good and gracious and all-knowing and all-kind and unjust. So God will never give you a burden or a challenge that is beyond your strength. Let me repeat this because it's really powerful. We should internalize this. Whenever we have a problem and it seems unsurmountable, it's actually a compliment. It is God's way of saying, I trust you. You have the strength and the necessary tools to overcome this. Because if God gives you a challenge or a problem that is too great for you, that would be unjust and mean. And what kind of God would that be? So every problem that comes to you, if you can see it with different eyes, if you have eyes to see, is an opportunity for your spiritual growth. Of course, you might not solve all the problems like you want them to be solved, but all of them will have a solution. So are we ready and willing and able to be aware of this, right? Of the fact that we are spirits connected to this evolution process, that oftentimes we chose it ourselves? Because if we do, and if we're constantly aware of this and connected to this greater peace, we're going to be grateful for all the hardships we have. Of course, I am not saying go out there and build hardships for yourselves, right? Let's not be masochists here. If you create it on yourself, it's your doing, it's not God's doing. You're dealing with your own consequences, right? We were talking about this. If you run a red light today, don't think it's karma, right? You ran a red light. Pay your ticket. It's your fault. Don't think, oh, I did something in my previous life. No, you ran a red light. It's in this lifetime. It was your doing. You did it, right? And so make sure that you will understand, internalize that you are in control of your own destiny here. And even if you want to forgive people and they don't want to be forgiven, right? It's not up to them. Like, you do your part. Maybe you've hurt someone and you apologize to them, but they're not ready to let go. They are still being harmful and difficult towards you. That's on them. When we are on the other side and we hurt people, we do our part and we forgive. We try to make amends. We act on it. But if they're not ready to forgive, then we have to be okay with them being in their space and knowing that it's not ready, they're not ready to deal with all the challenge and hurt that we've caused. We do what we can, but we can't hold ourselves back forever too, right? We can't give them power to dictate then how we're going to do our lives if we have already apologized. Then they're also going to be holding us hostage. And that goes with us. So self-forgiveness is also very important. But all of that to say, I'll stop babbling that. The beautiful example that we get from question 886 of the Spirit's book, of benevolence towards others, indulgence towards their faults, and forgiveness of their offenses, is a very practical method the good spirits give us in a response to a question that we ask them. How would Jesus put love into practice? And they tell us benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness, right? Benevolence, tolerance, forgiveness, because it's simple and easy for us to do. 3 little steps. When we don't know where to begin, we can use this little cheat sheet, this little formula, to help us get over any beefs we might have out there. And hopefully, after we do that, we will connect ourselves to our spiritual nature, and in so doing, be reminded of this amazing example of this great soul, teacher and psychologist that understood this way more than we understand ourselves now, who was so expanded in terms of cosmic consciousness that he was able to understand our deepest and most darkest fears and problems, and was able to prescribe to us a message of love that we're still struggling to fully internalize and understand, but nevertheless has been left to us in forms of parables, and now we receive it again from the good spirits that have come back to remind us of the teachings that he has left to us. And that voice still echoes through the ages in our souls when we're ready to move on. But all it takes, the first step that we wish we take today, is just wanting to. And it starts with prayer, it starts with good thinking, and all of that can do that. It's very democratic. And so from the bottom of my heart, I hope that more and more you can continue to be awesome by taking a step towards letting all that energy that you may be carrying, if you're carrying any, in resentment, go. Work on yourselves, be happy, because that's what he wishes. And wouldn't it be better, and wouldn't it be wonderful when we all get to a point when we have zero resentment in our souls, and we're genuinely happy to see each other as we are happy to see those we truly love? Wouldn't it be wonderful to get to that point where everywhere we look, we love people for who they are? Wouldn't that be amazing? Imagine the people that you love the most in this world. Hold that in your thought, all the feelings you have for them. Now imagine if you could do that to everybody around you. Eventually you will. It's a matter of time, maybe a lot of time, let's be honest, right? But why not we start practicing today? So I hope that God may continue to bless you as you have taken the first step of wanting to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here on a Sunday where there's beautiful weather out there. And may you have the strength to continue on your trek. And I hope that God continue to bless you. Thank you.
We thank you so very much. And we hope to have you back.
I would love to. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we're going to do questions.
Awesome.
Yeah,
because I love being here with you. I love hearing from you guys.
Yes.
Yes.
So.
Thanks for having me.
Oh no, thank you. Thank you so very much. We're going to open for questions. And
if you don't ask 3 questions, I'm not going to let you leave. At least 3 questions.
John.
I don't have a question, but a comment. You have lots of nuggets there of hope. But when you said that Jesus split history, we have always known BC and AD, but never put that together.
Mm-hmm.
That's what caused the entire world to look at the calendar different.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been centuries later
Mm-hmm.
and all that. But that was very eye-opening to me. Thank you for that.
That is awesome. Thank you. I oftentimes think about that. Some little things of the day-to-day that goes unnoticed. But it was such a personality that his teachings has split the way we look at things, that everything comes before him and after him, you know? And I like to say that Moses was really great, from the Judaico-Christian tradition, which I'm more familiar with. Moses was great. He was version 1.0. Version 1.0 came in and said, don't do things, right? Like we do with kids. Like, don't put your hand in the power outlets. Don't put your hand in a hot stove. You're going to burn yourself. Don't. Jesus comes and gives us the 2.0 version, right? The improved. When we're no longer little kids, we're like teenagers, right? Getting there-ish. And he says, instead of don't, what does he does? Do. Love one another, right? And the beginning is love one another as you would like to be loved. And in the end of his coming here, he gives us an upgrade. He gives like version 2.5. And he says, right before he's about to be crucified, he goes, a new commandment I give you, a new commandment I leave you. Love one another, not as you like to be loved, but as I have loved you. Whoa, right? And now it's an expansion piece. Like, we're not about like, oh, because maybe I am so selfish that I'm not wanting to love you in the right way. But now we need to look at the way he treated us and encompassed us even farther. And version 3.0 is him coming back, which we already have, through the spirits, and reminding us of all that happened so we can go back and realize. So that we may build a critical thinking by ourselves and be able to do it, and no longer need a guru, need a figure, like a strong figure like Moses, or the personality of Jesus, but just understand goodness in general. Because we're still very attached to the physical form, right? We still have like leaders that lead us to things because it's them. When they go, we kind of fall back apart. But now the message is The spirits come, the promised consoler that we see in the Gospel of John. You know, I'm going to see you for a little while, then I'm going to come back, but I will leave you a consoler, and he will speak not of himself. He will be invisible, but he will teach the things that I have taught you. The spirits are coming back. They're saying, we live just like you. You cannot see us. They don't speak of their own voices. The mediums speak for them. And here's the teachings. You must pay attention to the people. That's what they're doing. So it's a beautiful thing. And so his personality split the world and it still continues with us. It's amazing. It's pretty cool.
From these 3 steps, I feel indulgence is the most difficult in my point of view. Because in the face of benevolence, I'm giving through my prayer someone that is more capable than me and be distant. But indulgence, I think sometimes we do still in a bad way. When you say tolerance, I think I need a little bit of more quality to this tolerance. Because depends on how my tolerance is, I can build up some kind of guilt because I'm tolerant too much.
Mm-hmm.
Or swallow the situation, thinking
Mm-hmm.
I'm being tolerant, and then I develop cancer, my immune system goes down,
Mm-hmm.
infection, accidents, whatever. So can you give a little
No,
bit of more quality to this?
You've made a great point there, which is it's important for us not to confuse tolerance with being in a punching bag, right? Because sometimes we also do that because we don't feel courageous and that we can advocate for ourselves. And so we feel intimidated and oh yeah, that person, oh okay, yeah. And we tell ourselves we're being tolerant because we are still struggling with speaking up for ourselves, right? So it's very important for us to understand that being tolerant does not mean, oh, here I am, shoot me again, right? That's not prudent at all. What we need to do is tolerant, in recognizing that the person or people are the way they are, and that's okay because they're spirits in evolution. But you're not going to put yourself in harm's way again. So if you are in an unhappy place and you're trying to work on your tolerance, it's not working, withdraw. Don't stay there. Don't get punched literally or figuratively in the face, right? There's limits. You have to watch out for yourself. You have to be your own advocate, right? You have to make sure that you're healthy. If you are not healthy, if you're not taking care of yourselves, how can you then help others? You are responsible for yourself first. And so it's important for you to know that the tolerance is accepting people the way they are, but it's not necessarily exposing you to their abuses every time. That's something that we need to learn. It's really hard. I think it's really hard because we still struggle with also standing up for ourselves because sometimes we have a guilty conscience because we used our moral yardstick and we realize that we have done some horrible things. And so we also know, I'm not a great person. Maybe I deserve this. Whether you deserve it or not, right? You can excuse yourselves from a dangerous situation to improve and come back healthy. So it might take a couple of goes, right? And sometimes we're optimistic. We think we're ready, but when we get ourselves back into the fold, we interact with the people and the energy and the memories come back, and we realize that we are not as strong as we thought we were. And it's okay for us to take a step back again, work on it some more, and go back. It's going to be a back and forth process. One thing we learn from nature is that it takes repetition, right? We have days, the sun comes out, comes down. We have years, we have cycles around the sun, the years. We have reincarnations. It takes us practice to do things. So let's not put it on ourselves too, to from one day to the next feel like if we don't forgive in 2, 3 days, 7 days, we are bad people. Because sometimes we do that, right? No, keep working at it. But it's a great point. Don't think that tolerance means accepting what's done to you, right? And letting people do it again. It just means understanding that people are different and they're in different places. But yes, you have the right, you have the free will, and you have the obligation to make sure that you're always healthy. Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, in every way you can.
So the ultimate goal would be what you said, the ego to die. because that way is when you don't feel hurt by what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I look at that in the Spiritism say, is the pride and the selfish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that we
Mm-hmm.
it's related to that. So, after going through all of this, what I was thinking is, one way, I don't know if that's the way, that's my question to you. It would be when we don't want something, like we fill out our cup with these things that we want, so we get out of the things we don't want. That's my process. So then I would put the practice number 3, which is to grow out of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like thinking about not just helping others, I think the Spirit is saying help others, service. That is one way for us to be outside of ourselves.
Yes.
Is that the way? Like by doing things like thinking of others before we think about ourselves?
Yes, so it's a great question. I love that. I think there's so many psychological things in there. Let's try to take a stab at it, see how we do. So yes, I think that one fundamental message that we hear from the good spirits is, as long as we keep ourselves inside our little construct, our little world, and that's all we see, we're going to keep focusing on our pain. And let's be honest, our pain is the most painful pain in the world, right? Because it's the only one we feel, right? So somebody might have died next door, but I've got an ingrown nail. I'm sorry, I'm having a worse day than you are, right? And that's generally how it is. Let's be honest. And that's okay, because we're still so stuck in our own world. And so when we practice, like, for instance, going out of ourselves and doing charitable work and helping the homeless or whatever it is, visiting hospitals and seeing people in different states, it helps us expand our focus outside of us and say, you know what, maybe my ingrown nail ain't as bad as not having a house. And we start to change the way we consider things. So absolutely, I think that there is a really big part of going outside ourselves, right, to recognize. But what sometimes also happens, and I think it's kind of for the first part which you're talking about, which is also very dangerous because we don't like extremes, right, is that sometimes people go outside of themselves because they don't want to go back and look in. They don't want to deal with some of the stuff that they're carrying. They feel really guilty about stuff. So rather than having the opportunity to go and fix things, they give themselves tirelessly to work towards others. And they exhaust themselves. All of that not to have the time to look into themselves and deal with that. It's also it happens very frequently. We do that all the time. We avoid, right? We procrastinate. We find other things to fill our cup with so that we don't have to deal with what's pressing. So whatever works for you, it's valid. We're not passing judgment on any of those. But the point here is, whether you deal with this now or later, you're going to have to deal with this, right? So you can't postpone and distract that however long we want to. But ultimately, we have to come back and look into ourselves and deal with that monster that's inside us, where it's probably guilt most of the time. And consciousness is a funny thing. Consciousness and awareness in general. We might delay it, but the longer we delay it, the more it kind of grows, because we know that our spirit knows we're delaying. So it keeps getting worse and worse, right? So it's kind of funny, like the spiritual part of us knows we should be doing something and we're not. And here we're trying to distract us, and this part's saying, you have to deal with this, you have to deal with this, you have to deal with this, and eventually it's going to come much bigger. So we're going to pay with interest, right? And we all know this because the spirits are so funny. In question 621 of the Spirits book, one of my favorite, they say, where are the laws of good and justice and nature inscribed? How can we know? Where's the manual to life? They basically ask. Give me the rules. Where do I find what's right and wrong, right? Because we all want that. We want the black and white. Tell me what to do. And the spirits tell us, in your consciousness. It's like, now I have to look for myself. It's like a kid. When I was a kid, I would come across a new word and say, Dad, what's that word? It's like, go look in the dictionary. I'm like, can you just tell me? Like, go look in the dictionary. Because if you look at it in the dictionary, you'll learn, right? And so when you have the manual, and it's here, you have to take that dive internally and kind of figure that out. And Make sure you're not in the extreme of avoiding it by focusing too much on your pain, but also trying to avoid it by focusing on other people's pain. So finding the middle ground is extremely hard. Nobody can tell you what it is. You have to deal with it. You have to find it yourselves. And ultimately, that's everything we do, right? We have to find out what works for us. And, sometimes it's okay to postpone some stuff because we're not ready to deal with it. We're just saying, don't postpone it forever, right? Because it will come back and bite us. And there's a great passage in the New Testament. I'm very New Testament today, where Jesus says, if you have a disagreement, don't kneel down and you're praying in the altar. Stand up, stop praying, and go and deal with that challenge right now before, it's too late and the judge comes and collects you. Basically say, hey, if you have a trouble in this lifetime, don't sit down and pray, oh, I wish we could fix this. Dude, yeah, it's great, but go out there and fix it before it gets worse and your consciousness kind of keeps adding up to the tab. So it's really hard. Is that where you're going? So that balance is very difficult because we do that. We try to not feel by moving away, right? We try to not be there. That's okay for a little bit. But ultimately, as universal spirits, we're going to have to come back and deal with that because it's there, right? Think about it. Reincarnation is awesome. It really is great. Because if we have troubles with people and we just change the channel on them, right? Say, I don't want to deal with it anymore, right? And you do this. And then 400 incarnations later, you'll be in an island by yourself. Nobody's around, right? Because if you keep avoiding it, you're just going to isolate yourself and you won't be able to move forward. And so it kind of forces us to get back. Like if we let it aside and procrastinate, life puts us back together because we have to deal with that. Otherwise, we won't move on. And now we also know for the very severe cases, even if one of us passes from the physical world, the relationship still happens in the other world. So we still have that energy going back between the incarnate and the discarnate that might not be so good, right? And whether we go to the side here or there, we still need to deal with that. So it happens in all sides of life. It's amazing. And so sometimes we have what we call negative spiritual influences, and that's also because from relationships from our past lives that we have not dealt properly with that still affect us. And we generally think, because we look so small, because we look at things in a so small perspective, we think that the bad spirits are tormenting us, right? Quite possibly, we were the bad guys, right? We did something really bad that they haven't let go just yet. And so there's no bad guys and good guys. There's just people and having to solve the relationship. Much the same way we have relationships in this planet that don't work out so great, even when we are here, and we need to address it. So it's really, really hard. But we have to think outside the box, right? Our spiritual box. And the way to do that is to think about other people. That's a great tool for us to start practicing that. If you feel like you're really struggling, even with depression, a lot of doctors nowadays tell you, if you are really in a depressive state, go out there and try to do some social work. So that you can get out of the house and leave your bubble and start seeing the outside world and considering it. And it helps sometimes in the treatment as well, besides obviously medical treatment and so forth. But it's challenging, it's difficult. But thank you for that. It's a really great psychological piece. Let's not swing too much to either side. Third question. 1, 2, 3. Did we do 3? Oh yeah, we did 3. All right. Nothing else? So let me say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for letting me come here and talk to you. It's really greatly a pleasure to interact with you guys. Hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit more, to share experiences and ideas. I love hearing from you. And I hope sincerely that you continue to do that, which you're doing, which is try to find a way that works for you to be better and happier because you deserve it. You're the children of God. And one last thought that I leave you with in the piece of love and everything else is, what would you do if the whole universe belonged to you? How would you be different? If you had absolutely everything in the universe, how would you act and behave? Would it be different? My suggestion to you is that you think about that, because maybe we'll start thinking differently. And remind yourselves that you're children of God. So by definition, you're the heirs of the universe. So everything belongs to you. And if everything belongs to you, how would you manage? What would you do? And maybe we'll be less worried about the small things and start thinking about the big picture more, which will help us think about the Spirit and maybe think about love and forgiveness in a way that frames it slightly different. It's helped me, and from the bottom of my heart, I hope you are happy. I hope you find joy and continue your trek, your seeking of some great things. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon. God bless you. Yeah.